Before we begin, a quick request. My dream has always been to tell stories, and I want to reach 1,000 subscribers. If you enjoy this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you. Claire Bennett felt as if her legs were made of lead. 12 hours navigating the corridors of Northwestern Memorial, shuttling between the cardiology ward and the ICU, had left their mark on every muscle in her body. Rain drummed against the windows of the number 151 bus, carrying her through the wet streets of Chicago toward home. It was already 10 o'clock at night, and she still wore her green hospital scrubs under a coat that smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Her stomach let out a loud protest, reminding her that her last meal had been at 6 in the morning. A cheese sandwich devoured on the run between patients. Now, staring through the steamy glass at the passing city lights, Claire made an impulsive decision. She got off at a stop on Michigan Avenue, where the rain immediately plastered her light brown hair to her head. "Just something quick," she muttered to herself, quickening her pace toward the first restaurant she saw. A neon sign proclaimed, "The Gilded Stag." The name sounded familiar, but Claire was too tired to wonder from where. All that mattered was the warm light glowing inside and the fact that she wouldn't have to cook. The maitre d' at the entrance, a man in an elegant suit that looked like it cost more than her monthly salary, gave her an odd look. Claire figured he was put off by her hospital attire, but she was too hungry to care. "Good evening," she said, trying to force some confidence into her voice. "Could I get a table for one?" The man hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking between her face and something behind her. Finally, he nodded and gestured toward the main dining room. "Of course, ma'am. That table over there should be suitable." Claire walked in the indicated direction, paying no mind to the restaurant's luxurious interior. It was only when she sat down at a table draped in a white linen cloth, set with crystal glasses and silver cutlery, that she realized she might have made a mistake. This place looked far more expensive than she'd planned. "Damn," she whispered, reaching for her wallet. She had about $100 on her, money she'd intended to use for groceries for the entire week. Maybe she could just order a soup and get out of there as fast as possible. She was looking around for a waiter when a man appeared at her table. He was tall, with dark hair slightly tousled by the rain, wearing a navy blazer that looked tailor-made. He was in his early 30s, maybe a little older, with the kind of eyes that made women forget their own names. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a pleasant, warm tone. "I think you're sitting at my table." Claire felt a blush creep up her face. Of course, that must have been why the maitre d' looked at her so strangely. "Oh, I'm so sorry." She stood up so quickly she nearly knocked over a wine glass. I was on a long shift, and I guess I'm not thinking clearly. I'll go." The man held up a hand, a gesture stopping her. "No, please stay. I don't mind the company." He smiled, and Claire noticed a small scar above his left eyebrow. "I'm Matthew." "Claire," she replied automatically, still standing. "But really, I don't want to bother you. You're probably waiting for someone." "Actually, I'm not." Matthew pulled out her chair for her. "And frankly, after the day I've had, the company of someone normal sounds like a blessing." Claire hesitated. She should have just apologized and left, but the way he looked at her, not with the practiced appraisal she knew from bars and dates, but with genuine interest, made her sit back down. "Normal?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's an interesting choice of words. What do you do that makes normalcy such a rarity?" Matthew sat across from her, looking momentarily surprised by her directness. "Business," he answered after a moment. "And you, judging by the uniform, medicine?" "Nurse," Claire confirmed, automatically straightening the collar of her scrubs. "At Northwestern, hence the elegant attire." Her tone was slightly sarcastic, but not unfriendly. A waiter approached their table with menus that looked to be bound in leather. Claire glanced at the prices and felt her stomach clench for a reason other than hunger. The smallest salad cost more than her lunches in the hospital cafeteria for an entire week. "Perhaps we can start with something to drink," Matthew suggested. Wine. I don't really drink during the week, Claire lied. The truth was she couldn't afford a wine that, in this place, probably cost as much as she made in a day. Maybe just water. Sparkling water for the lady, Matthew said to the waiter. And for me as well. When the waiter left, Matthew looked at her with curiosity. Long day at the hospital? 12 hours, Claire confirmed, slumping slightly in her chair. One of our doctors called in sick, so I had to cover his shift. I'm not complaining, we need the money, but she trailed off, realizing she probably shouldn't be telling a stranger about the hospital's financial problems. But, Matthew encouraged her. Claire looked at him carefully. Something about his demeanor made her feel comfortable, as if she'd known him for years. It was strange. It usually took her much longer to open up to people. But sometimes it feels like the system is eating us alive, she finally said. The patients, the staff, everyone. Not enough people, not enough money, too much bureaucracy. And people suffer. Matthew listened to her with an attentiveness that surprised her more and more. Most men she met, their eyes would glaze over when she started talking about work. It sounds frustrating, he said after a moment. Why do you stay in that job? Claire thought about the answer. It was a question she asked herself every day. Because someone has to, she finally replied. And because, despite everything, there are moments. When I help someone feel better, when I hold the hand of an elderly woman who's scared of surgery, or when I see a patient go home healthy, those moments make it worth it. As she spoke, her eyes lit up with that special glow that appears when people talk about things they truly care about. Matthew watched her as if he was seeing her for the first time. That's beautiful, he said quietly. What's beautiful? The way you talk about it. In my world, he paused, as if considering what he could say. In business, you rarely meet people who do something for that kind of motivation. Claire smiled ironically. In business, the motivation is money. That's logical. Logical, but not always satisfying, Matthew replied, and there was a note in his voice that Claire couldn't identify. The waiter brought the water and discreetly waited for their order. Claire glanced at the menu again, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. Maybe, she began, maybe I should go. It's late, and I have another shift tomorrow. Please, stay, Matthew said quickly. If you'll allow me, I'd like to invite you to dinner, as an apology for you sitting at my table. But I was the one who... Claire started to protest. I was the one who didn't immediately say the table was reserved, he interrupted smoothly. So it's my fault. Claire looked at him suspiciously. Something in his tone suggested he wasn't telling the whole truth, but she couldn't put her finger on what it might be. I can't let a stranger pay for my meal, she said finally. What if we stop being strangers? Matthew proposed with a smile. You tell me more about your work, and I'll tell you about mine. By the end of the evening, we'll be acquaintances. Claire hesitated. Common sense told her to leave this restaurant, which was clearly out of her financial league, and go home to a sandwich. But something in the way Matthew looked at her, in his genuine interest in what she was saying, made her want to stay. All right, she finally agreed, but only if you let me pay you back next time. Next time? Matthew repeated, raising an eyebrow. Claire felt herself blush. I mean, if there is a next time, she corrected herself quickly. There will be, Matthew said with a conviction that surprised her. For the next hour, they talked about everything and nothing. Claire spoke about her patients, her colleagues, what her day was like. Matthew listened intently, asked questions, laughed at her anecdotes from the hospital. In return, he talked about his work. It was a strangely vague story about project management and client meetings. But Claire was too tired and too interested in his company to probe deeper. The food was delicious. Claire finally chose a wild mushroom risotto that tasted like something from a dream. Matthew ordered a steak, but spent most of the time watching her as she told another story. And then, she was saying, gesturing with her fork, this patient, an 80-year-old Mr. Henderson, says to me, Nurse, do you think I'm stupid? I know these pills aren't vitamins. It turned out he hadn't taken his heart medication for a whole week because he thought we were trying to poison him. Matthew laughed, a real hearty laugh. And what did you do? I sat down with him and explained exactly what the medications were and why he needed them. It took an hour, but he finally understood. The next day, he brought me chocolates and said he knew we didn't want to kill him anymore. Your patients trust you, Matthew stated. I try to be honest with them, Claire replied. People can sense when someone is lying or hiding something from them. And in a hospital, when you're sick and scared, what you need most of all is the truth. A moment of silence fell over the table. Matthew was looking at her with a strange expression. What? Claire asked. Did I say something wrong? No, he answered quickly. It's just, that's a rare quality. Honesty. In your business, probably, Claire agreed. But I couldn't do it any other way. My mum always said that a person is only as good as their word. A wise woman, your mum. She was, Claire corrected him quietly. She passed away 3 years ago. I'm very sorry, Matthew said, and the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Thank you. She was the one who wanted me to become a nurse. She was a midwife herself, spent her whole life helping people. She once told me that the most important thing in life is to have a profession that has meaning. And you have a profession like that. I try, Claire replied. And you? Does your work have meaning? The question clearly surprised Matthew. He was silent for a long moment, swirling the water in his glass. Honestly, he said finally, I'm not sure. I often feel like it's all just a game. Numbers, contracts, meetings. But does it help anyone? Does it make a difference in someone's life? He shrugged. I don't know. Claire looked at him with new interest. Most people who earned enough to eat in restaurants like this didn't question their work. Maybe you just haven't found the right way to use what you do, she suggested. Any job can have meaning if you find a way to help others through it. Matthew looked at her as if she'd said something revolutionary. I've never thought about it that way, he admitted. When the waiter brought the check, discreetly turned toward Matthew, Claire tried to peek at the amount, but couldn't see anything. Matthew paid with a card, giving her no chance to protest. Thank you, she said, as they were leaving the restaurant. The rain had stopped, and the streets of Chicago glistened under the glow of the streetlights. For dinner and for the conversation. It's been a long time since I've had such a nice talk with someone. Me too, Matthew replied. Can I walk you to the bus stop? They were standing on the sidewalk in front of the restaurant now, and for the first time that evening, Claire felt the awkwardness of the situation. Dinner was over, the conversation interrupted by reality. Tomorrow, she would return to her hospital world, and he to his business world. It had been a lovely evening, but now they should say goodbye and go their separate ways. You don't have to, she said. The stop is close. I'll walk you anyway, Matthew stated. It's late. They walked along the sidewalk in silence, their footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. Claire thought about how strange the evening had been, how one mistake, one wrongly chosen table, could lead to such an unexpected connection. At the bus stop, they paused. A bus was already heading their way, its headlights cutting through the darkness of the street. Claire, Matthew said quickly, before the bus could pull up. Could we see each other again? Claire hesitated. She liked this man. The way he listened, his questions, the way he looked at her as if he genuinely wanted to know her. But something told her they came from different worlds. I don't know, she answered honestly. Tonight was unexpected. But does it make sense? You dine at places like the Gilded Stag, and I eat sandwiches in the hospital cafeteria. That doesn't matter, Matthew said. And there was something in his voice Claire couldn't quite define. Please, just give me a chance. The bus stopped with a hiss of its brakes. Claire had to make a decision. All right, she said finally, reaching for her phone. But next time we're going somewhere else, somewhere I can pay for myself. They exchanged phone numbers, and Claire boarded the bus. Through the window, she saw Matthew standing at the stop, watching the bus drive away until it disappeared around a corner. At home, in the shower, Claire thought about the strange evening, about Matthew, his questions, the way he listened to her stories. There was something mysterious about him, the way he avoided details about his work, the way the maitre d' had treated him as if he knew him. But there was also an honesty she sensed when he spoke about his work and his doubts. And the way he had looked at her when she talked about her patients, as if what she did was something exceptional. Maybe that's why, when her phone rang at 11:30 and Matthew appeared on the screen, she answered. "Hello? Hi," she heard his voice. "I hope I didn't wake you. I just wanted to thank you for tonight." "I wasn't asleep," she replied, sitting up in bed. "And I should be thanking you for dinner." "For the company," he corrected her. "I haven't had such a good conversation in a long time." They talked for another half hour, about nothing in particular, about their plans for tomorrow, about the weather, about whether Claire liked Chicago in the fall. When they hung up, Claire lay in the dark, smiling for no reason. She didn't know yet that the man she had spent the evening with owned not only the Gilded Stag, but an entire chain of hotels and restaurants across the country. She didn't know that the maitre d' hadn't been hesitating, but had been trying to decide whether he should let her into a place that usually catered only to the city's wealthiest clients. And she didn't know that Matthew Hayes, lying in his luxury penthouse in Lincoln Park that night, was for the first time in years thinking about someone other than business and profits. They both fell asleep, thinking about their next meeting, unaware of the complications the truth about who they each really were would bring. Matthew Hayes stood by the panoramic window of his office on the 23rd floor of a skyscraper in the Loop, looking out at the city sprawling beneath him. From up here, Chicago looked like a model. Tiny cars gliding along the streets, people the size of ants, and somewhere down there in that miniature reality, Claire was riding a bus to work. For 3 days, since they'd exchanged numbers, he had spoken with her every evening. He'd learned that she lived in a small apartment in Rogers Park, that she had a cat named Rufus she'd found as a kitten behind the hospital, and that her greatest luxury was a Saturday breakfast in bed with coffee and a book. He listened to her stories about patients, about colleagues, about the hospital's struggles with staff shortages and outdated equipment. And she had no idea she was talking to a man who could finance the replacement of all the equipment on her ward without making a significant dent in his budget. "Mr. Hayes," the voice of his assistant Monica, interrupted his thoughts. "The meeting with the Hilton board is in 15 minutes. Matthew turned from the window. Monica Evans had worked for him for 5 years, flawless, fiercely loyal, aware of every detail of his schedule. She was 35, always impeccably dressed in designer suits, and treated his personal life as part of her professional duties. "Hilton can wait," he said. "Reschedule it for tomorrow." Monica raised an eyebrow, a gesture that from her signified the highest degree of astonishment. "It's a very important meeting, Mr. Hayes, regarding the acquisition of their hotels in New York." "I know what the meeting is about," Matthew replied, returning to his desk, "but I have other plans today." "Other plans?" Monica repeated, in a tone that suggested the words were in a language unknown to her. Matthew looked at her carefully. For 5 years he'd had virtually no personal life. Work, business meetings, official dinners, conferences. The only woman he'd been seeing was Alexandra Vance, the daughter of one of the country's biggest real estate investors, beautiful, educated, perfect on paper. Their relationship was more of a business alliance than a romance, which suited everyone, until Alexandra started talking about marriage and children, and Matthew realized the thought of spending the rest of his life with her felt like someone was sucking the air from his lungs. "I have a lunch meeting," he finally said. "With whom?" Monica asked automatically, reaching for her notepad. "Should I book a table at Alinea? Or perhaps at—" "It's not a business meeting," Matthew interrupted her. Monica blinked as if she didn't understand the words. "Not business? Personal," Matthew explained, putting on his jacket. "I'm meeting a woman. Miss Vance, I thought, not Alexandra, someone else." A look of pure panic flashed across Monica's face. In her 5 years of working for him, Matthew had never cancelled an important meeting at the last minute, and certainly not for a woman. "Mr. Hayes," she began cautiously, "are you aware that your lunch with Miss Vance is scheduled for Friday? If this has nothing to do with Alexandra," Matthew said, heading for the door. "And Monica, don't call me unless the building is on fire." Left alone in the office, Monica Evans felt her perfectly organized world begin to tremble. She stood motionless for a moment, then reached for her phone. Claire checked her watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. 3:30. Matthew was only half an hour late, but she was already certain he'd changed his mind. She was sitting in a small cafe, the Sparrow's Nest, in the Old Town neighborhood, a place she had chosen herself because it was affordable and pleasantly decorated. She had ordered a coffee and was waiting, trying not to look like a woman who'd been stood up. Over the last 3 days, their evening phone calls had become longer and more personal. Matthew told her about his work, still in general terms, but she was beginning to sense it was more than just project management. She was too caught up in the charm of his voice, the way he laughed at her jokes, to dig deeper. "Sorry, I'm late." She heard the familiar voice and looked up. Matthew was standing at her table, looking stressed. "Problems at work." "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind," Claire said, feeling a wave of relief. "Never," he replied, sitting across from her. He was wearing a dark suit that looked expensive, but he'd tried to give himself a casual air by loosening his tie. "One of my meetings just ran long." Claire studied him closely. Something was different since their first meeting. He seemed more tense, as if he wasn't sure what to say. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yes, of course," he answered quickly. "So, how was your day at the hospital?" And so they began to talk. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that Matthew was hiding something. His answers to her questions about work were even more vague than usual, and a few times she caught him scanning the cafe instead of listening, as if checking to see if anyone recognized him. "Listen," she finally said, interrupting his story about some unspecified project. "Are you by any chance married?" Matthew practically jumped. "What? No! Why would you ask that?" "Because you're acting like you're afraid someone will see us together," Claire answered directly. "Either you're married or you have a girlfriend, or, I don't know, maybe you're ashamed to be seen with me." "It has nothing to do with you," Matthew said quickly. "I mean, it's complicated." "How complicated?" Matthew sighed, running a hand over his face. For a moment, he looked like he was fighting an internal battle. "I'm not married," he said finally, "and I don't have a girlfriend. I mean, I did, but that's over. And I'm acting weird because—" He stopped. "Because? Because I haven't been entirely honest about who I am," he blurted out. Claire felt her stomach tighten. So there it was. Something was wrong. In what way? My work," Matthew began, fidgeting with his spoon. "It's not just project management like I told you." "Then what is it?" Matthew hesitated for so long that Claire began to wonder if he would answer at all. "I run a company," he said at last. "A family company." "What kind of company?" "Hotels," he answered, not meeting her eyes. "A small chain of hotels." Claire leaned back in her chair. That explained the restaurant, the expensive suit, the way the maitre d' had treated him. "How many hotels is a small chain?" she asked. "A few," Matthew replied evasively. "Is a few 3, 5, or a dozen?" Matthew looked at her, his face a mixture of remorse and determination. 27, he admitted, across the country. Claire felt as if someone had thrown cold water on her. 27 hotels was not a small chain. It was a serious business. Big money. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start?" she asked quietly. "Because," Matthew searched for the words, "because every time people find out how much I'm worth, everything changes. They stop being natural. They either want something from me or they treat me like some exotic adventure. And me? You treated me like a person," he answered simply. "Not a walking wallet. You told me about your work, about what's important to you. You listened when I talked about my doubts, and for the first time in years I felt Normal. Claire was silent for a long moment, trying to process this information. On one hand, she understood his motives. On the other, she felt deceived. "How many other things are you hiding from me?" she asked finally. "Nothing important," Matthew answered quickly. "I mean, the company is bigger than I said. And," he hesitated, "not just hotels, restaurants too. The Gilded Stag is your restaurant?" Matthew nodded. "That's why the maitre d' looked at me so strangely," Claire realized, "and why you had no problem with the reservation." "I'm sorry," Matthew said sincerely. "I know I should have told you right away, but..." "But what? You thought I was some gold digger who wanted to rob you?" "No!" Matthew protested. "I thought that if you found out how much money I had, you'd stop talking to me like a normal person, that you'd feel uncomfortable, or you'd think I wanted to buy you things, or I'd think you're an arrogant rich guy playing with a poor nurse for entertainment." Matthew paled. "It's not like that," he said quietly. "How am I supposed to know that?" Claire asked, feeling anger rise in her voice. "How am I supposed to know what's the truth and what's another lie?" "Because I'm telling you," Matthew replied desperately. "Everything else I told you, about my work, about my doubts, about how I feel different with you, all of that is true." Claire looked at him for a long moment. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, but she also felt hurt. She liked him, maybe even more than liked him, but now everything was complicated. "I need some time to think about this," she said finally, getting up from the table. "Claire, please." Matthew stood up too. "Don't leave like this." "I'm not leaving," she replied, putting on her coat. "I just need time." Will you call me?" Claire hesitated. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I have to decide if I want to be in a relationship with someone who started it with a lie." She walked out of the cafe, leaving Matthew alone at the table. On the street, tears stung her eyes, though she wasn't sure if it was from hurt, anger, or disappointment. Matthew sat in the cafe for another half an hour, staring at Claire's unfinished coffee. He felt as if he had just lost something precious before he'd even fully realized how much it meant to him. His phone rang. It was Monica. "Yes," he answered reluctantly. "Mr. Hayes, the Hilton meeting has been rescheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow. But Miss Vance is calling. She wants to know if she should prepare for the charity gala on Saturday. Apparently, she was supposed to be your date." Matthew closed his eyes. Alexandra. He had completely forgotten about her. "Tell her I'll call her tomorrow," he said. "But Mr. Hayes..." "Tomorrow, Monica." He hung up and left the cafe. Suddenly, Chicago felt alien to him, a city he had lived in his whole life, but where he had never felt as lonely as he did now. Claire rode the bus home, staring out the window at the passing streets. In her pocket, her phone vibrated. More messages from Matthew that she wasn't reading. "I'm sorry, I know you have every right to be angry. Can we talk, please? I don't want to lose you." She read them all, but didn't reply. She needed time to understand her own feelings. Because the truth was, she wasn't just angry about the lie. She was also terrified of how attached she'd become to him in just a few days. At home, Rufus greeted her, the orange cat who had been her only steady companion for 3 years. She sat on the sofa, and the cat curled up on her lap, a purring ball of warmth. "What do you think, Rufus?" she asked, stroking him behind the ears. "Can you trust a man who starts a relationship with a lie?" Rufus just purred louder. Claire thought about how Matthew had listened to her stories about patience, about how honestly he'd spoken of his doubts about his work, about the way he'd looked at her when she talked about her mother. Maybe he really hadn't meant to lie to her. Maybe he just wanted to be treated like a regular person, not the owner of 27 hotels. But now that she knew the truth, everything felt different. He had more money than she would ever earn in her entire life. He lived in a different world, ate at different restaurants, had different problems. What could she offer him? Evenings spent watching Netflix? Dates in cheap cafes? Walks in the park because she couldn't afford anything else? The phone rang. This time it was a call, not a message. "Hello?" she answered, even though she knew who was calling. "Hi," she heard Matthew's voice. He sounded tired. I know you said you needed time, but can we at least talk? On the phone, Claire closed her eyes. His voice did things to her that she didn't want to feel. We're talking, she replied. I want to apologize, Matthew said, for lying, for not trusting you from the beginning. Why didn't you trust me? Because, Matthew sighed, because the last woman I was with was only with me for my money. She never said it outright, but when we broke up, she tried to get money from me for her business. She said it was only fair, since she had invested her time in our relationship. That's horrible, Claire said sincerely. It was, Matthew agreed. And then I met you, and for the first time in years I was talking to a woman who didn't know how much I made, and who treated me like just Matthew. But I know now, Claire reminded him. And how do you feel now? Different. Claire thought about her answer. Yes, she admitted. I feel like I don't know who you really are. Dean, I'm the same man you've been talking to for the last 3 days, Matthew said quietly. The same one who listens to your stories about work and who worries about whether what he does has any meaning. But you're also a millionaire who owns 27 hotels, Claire added. That's true, Matthew agreed. Does that mean we can't get to know each other? Claire was silent for a long moment. Rufus lifted his head and looked at her, as if understanding the weight of the moment. I don't know, she finally answered honestly. We come from different worlds, Matthew. You can eat in the most expensive restaurants in the city, and I'm counting my dollars to buy lunch in the hospital cafeteria. But does that really matter? Matthew asked. Does the fact that I have money mean we can't have anything in common? It means our lives are very different, Claire replied, and that maybe you're just looking for an exotic adventure with a girl from the other side of the tracks. That's what I was afraid of, Matthew said quietly. That you would think that. Well, what am I supposed to think? How am I supposed to know what your real intentions are? She heard Matthew take a deep breath over the phone. I don't know, he admitted. I don't know how to prove it to you, but I can show you. How? Let me be a part of your world, he said. Don't take me to expensive restaurants. Take me to the places you like. Tell me about your work, your friends, the things that are important to you. And I'll just be Matthew, not a hotel owner, just a man who wants to get to know you. Claire felt her heart beat faster. There was a sincerity in his voice that she couldn't deny. And what about your world? She asked. What about your friends, your family, your work? It's complicated, Matthew admitted. But if you're willing, we'll find a way. Claire closed her eyes, trying to make a decision. She could say no right now and go back to her safe, predictable life, or she could take a risk and see where all of this would lead. One chance, she said finally. What? I'm giving you one chance, she repeated, but no more lies, no more secrets. And if for a single moment I think this is just a game to you, it's not a game, Matthew interrupted her quickly. I promise you. We'll see, Claire replied. Call me tomorrow. I'll call, Matthew promised. And in his voice there was relief and something else, something that made Claire feel a warmth in her stomach. After they hung up, she sat on the sofa for a long time, stroking Rufus and thinking about what she had just agreed to. A relationship with a millionaire sounded like something out of a cheap romance novel, not her real life. But the way Matthew talked to her, the way he listened to her stories, that was real. She hoped it was real enough to survive the differences between their worlds. She didn't know yet that in a luxury apartment on the other side of the city, Matthew had just broken off his engagement with Alexandra Vance, informing her over the phone that he had fallen in love with someone else, and that Alexandra, sitting in her mansion in Lake Forest, was already planning her revenge on the woman who had dared to steal her fiancé. The story was just beginning, and the real complications were about to arrive. Claire woke up on Saturday morning with the feeling that her life had suddenly gained colors she hadn't noticed before. The sun, streaming through the window, seemed brighter, the coffee tasted better, and even Rufus purred louder than usual. Matthew called at 9, just as he'd promised. "Good morning," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "How did you sleep?" "Well," Claire replied, sitting up in bed. And you? Not great, Matthew admitted honestly. I was thinking about our conversation, about whether I gave you enough reason to trust me. And what conclusion did you come to? That words aren't enough. I want to show you that I'm being sincere. Claire felt a spark of curiosity. How? Are you free today? Yes, but I'd like to show you something important, Matthew interrupted. Something I don't show anyone. Can I come over? Claire glanced around her small apartment. A two-bedroom on the 10th floor of a high-rise in Rogers Park, with furniture bought from second-hand stores and on sale. She suddenly felt insecure. Maybe we should meet somewhere in the city, she suggested. Claire, Matthew said quietly, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. No pretending, no shame. You said you wanted to get to know the real me. Well, I want to get to know the real you too, your world included. Claire hesitated for a moment, then gave him her address. An hour later, the doorbell rang. Claire opened it, and for a moment couldn't speak. Matthew was standing before her in jeans and a simple shirt, no blazer, no expensive watch like he'd worn before. He looked normal. Hi, he said with an uncertain smile. Hi, she replied, letting him in. Nice to see you in civilian clothes. Matthew looked around the apartment. Claire watched his face, searching for signs of polite boredom or condescension, but found none. His gaze lingered on the bookshelf, on the photos on the dresser, on Rufus, who was watching him from an armchair. It's cozy, he said sincerely, and clean. I like it. You don't have to be polite, Claire replied, still feeling a bit self-conscious. I'm not being polite, Matthew answered, walking over to the bookshelf. It's just, this looks like a real home. My apartment is more of a showroom. He picked up one of the books, a novel about nurses working in war hospitals. Is this what you and your mom talked about? He asked. How did you know? It's inscribed. For my daughter, who will save the world one patient at a time. Mom. Claire felt a lump in her throat. She had forgotten about that dedication. My mom bought me that book when I decided to go into nursing, she said quietly. I've probably read it 10 times. Matthew gently placed the book back on the shelf. Will you tell me about her? About your mom? And so they spent the next hour sitting on the sofa with coffee as Claire talked about her mother, how she had taught her to cook, how they read books together, how she had supported her through difficult exams. Matthew listened attentively, asked questions, laughed at her anecdotes. And your family? Claire asked eventually. Parents, siblings. Matthew's expression changed subtly. My father passed away 5 years ago, he said. I inherited the business from him. My mother is alive, but we don't talk very often. Why? Matthew thought for a moment. My mother always had very specific plans for my life, he said finally. Who I should marry, how I should run the company, where I should live. When my father was alive, he sort of reined her in, but now, he shrugged, now it's a constant battle. And what does she think about you breaking up with, what was her name? Alexandra. Matthew looked at her, surprised. How do you know about Alexandra? Last night when we were talking, you mentioned the last woman I was with. Ah, right. Matthew rubbed his forehead. My mother thinks I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. Alexandra is the daughter of Vance, one of the biggest investors in the country. A perfect match on paper. And in practice? In practice, I felt like an actor playing a role with her, Matthew answered honestly. Everything was perfect and lifeless. Claire looked at him for a moment, trying to read his thoughts. And with me, how do you feel? Matthew looked directly into her eyes. Like myself, he answered simply. They sat in silence for a moment, and Claire could feel a tension building between them. A good tension, the kind that made it hard to breathe. You said you wanted to show me something, she reminded him, trying to distract herself from the fact that she wanted to hug him. Yes, Matthew stood up. Would you like to go somewhere with me? Half an hour later, they were in Matthew's car, a black Audi that was nice but didn't scream money. They drove through Chicago toward Evanston, talking about everything and nothing. Where are we going? Claire asked for the 3rd time. You'll see, Matthew replied with a mysterious smile. They stopped in front of a modest building on the outskirts of Evanston. It looked like an old family home with a garden full of flowers and a small sign above the entrance, St. Anne's Care Home. "What is this place?" Claire asked. "A nursing home for the elderly," Matthew replied, turning off the engine. "It's run by nuns. Come with me." They went inside, where they were greeted by an elderly nun with a friendly face. "Matthew," she said joyfully, "it's so good to see you. Mrs. Peterson has been asking about you all week." "Good morning, Sister Margaret," Matthew replied, visibly relaxing. "This is Claire, the one I told you about." Sister Margaret looked at Claire with curiosity. "Ah, the nurse. It's such a pleasure to meet you." Claire looked at Matthew surprised. He had been telling a nun about her. "Come on," Matthew said, taking her hand. "I'll show you something." They walked down a corridor lined with old but clean tiles, passing rooms from which the voices of elderly people could be heard. On the walls hung photos of residents, drawings from children who visited their grandparents. "Matthew?" They heard a weak voice. An elderly woman with grey hair tied in a bun came out of one of the rooms. She must have been around 80, but her eyes sparkled with life. "Mrs. Peterson!" Matthew went to her and gently hugged her. "How are you feeling?" "Better, now that you're here," the woman replied. "And is this the doctor you were telling me about?" "Nurse," Matthew corrected her gently. "Claire, this is Mrs. Peterson, the best chess player in the whole home." For the next hour, Claire watched Matthew in a completely new light. He knew all the residents' names, remembered their health problems, joked with them, listened to their stories. He was patient with Mr. Henderson, who told the same war story for the 5th time, and gentle with Mrs. Davis, who was in a wheelchair and was embarrassed that she didn't look pretty anymore. "How long have you been coming here?" Claire asked as they sat in the common room, watching Matthew play chess with Mrs. Peterson. 3 years, he replied, moving a pawn. "I started after my father died. I was looking for, I don't know, meaning in it all." "And did you find it?" Matthew looked at her, then at Mrs. Peterson, who was triumphantly capturing his rook. "Partly," he answered. "Here, I feel like what I do matters, even if it's just a conversation or a game of chess." Mrs. Peterson won the game, clapping her hands with the joy of a small child. "I know you let me win those last few moves," she said to Matthew with a twinkle in her eye. "Me? Never." Matthew replied with feigned outrage. "You're just too good." As they were leaving the nursing home, Sister Margaret stopped them at the exit. "Matthew," she said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for the new rehabilitation equipment. The residents are thrilled." "It was nothing," Matthew replied, clearly uncomfortable with the thanks. "How long have you been funding this home?" Claire asked as they walked back to the car. "I don't fund the whole home," Matthew answered quickly. Sometimes when they need something, I try to help." "Matthew." "What?" "You're the one paying to keep this place running, aren't you?" Matthew sighed. "Most of the costs," he admitted, "but it's not, I don't do it to show off. You just wanted your work to have meaning," Claire finished for him. Matthew looked at her with gratitude. "Exactly," he said. "Nobody knows about this. I mean, nobody from my circle." "Why?" "Because they'd think I'd gone crazy. Alexandra always said that for charity, you just write checks at official galas. To be seen, as she put it." Claire felt her heart beat faster. This man, who for 3 years had been secretly funding a nursing home, who remembered the names of the elderly residents and patiently listened to their stories. This was the real Matthew. "Why did you show me this?" she asked quietly. Matthew stopped the car at a red light and looked at her. "Because I wanted you to know who I really am," he answered. "Not just a rich guy with 27 hotels, but also a man who's trying to do some good with what he has." "And you wanted to see how I would react," Claire added. "Yes," Matthew admitted. "I was afraid you'd think it was an attempt to buy your affection." Claire reached out and touched his hand. "I think you're a good man," she said simply. Matthew turned his hand over and intertwined his fingers with hers. "And I think I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. Claire felt her face flush. It's a little early for declarations like that, she replied, but she didn't let go of his hand. Maybe, Matthew agreed, but it's the truth. The light turned green, but neither of them noticed. Only the honking of a car behind them brought them back to reality. That evening, they sat in a small restaurant in Wicker Park, a place Claire had chosen, where entrees cost $20, not $200. Matthew ate a bowl of tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich, as if it were the best meal of his life. "You have to promise me one thing," Claire said, fiddling with her fork. "What?" "That you'll never try to pay for me. For food, for gifts, for anything." Matthew thought about it. "And what if I want to take you somewhere a little nicer sometimes? Then you ask me beforehand, and you accept no for an answer." "Deal," Matthew agreed. "But on one condition." "What's that?" "You'll let me be a part of your world sometimes. Come to your work, meet your friends, do the things you like to do with you." Claire smiled. "Be careful what you wish for. My friends from work are a very curious bunch." "They can't be worse than my board of directors," Matthew replied with a smile. As they rode the bus back to her place, Matthew had left his car in a garage because he wanted to see how she got around the city. Claire thought about the strange day, about how Matthew had acted at the nursing home, how gently he had treated the elderly residents, how genuinely happy he had seemed in her small apartment. "Matthew," she said as he was getting off the bus at her stop. "Yes? What you said in the car. What specifically? About falling in love with me?" Matthew stopped on the sidewalk, looking at her intently. "Yes? Me too," she said quietly. "I'm falling in love with you." Matthew didn't reply with words. Instead, he moved closer and gently touched her face. Claire closed her eyes, feeling her heart pound like crazy. As they kissed on the sidewalk under a high-rise in Rogers Park, Claire thought that maybe some fairy tales did have a chance of coming true. She didn't know yet that at that very moment, in a luxurious restaurant downtown, Alexandra Vance was having dinner with a private investigator, giving him all the information she had managed to gather on Matthew's new girlfriend, and that in a few days her peaceful world would be turned upside down. Claire learned the true nature of Matthew's world on Monday morning, when a journalist from the Chicago Tribune called her at 6 a.m. "Is this Claire Bennett?" She heard a man's voice as she groggily answered the phone. "Yes, but who?" "Paul Kowalski from the Tribune. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Matthew Hayes." Claire sat bolt upright in bed, stunned. "Excuse me, do you have any comment on the news that you're dating one of the wealthiest men in the country?" How did you get my number? Doesn't it strike you as odd that a wealthy businessman broke off his engagement to the daughter of an influential investor for a nurse from a public hospital?" Claire hung up, her hands trembling. The phone immediately rang again. This time, she turned it off completely. At the hospital, the atmosphere was icy. Her colleagues glanced at her furtively, whispering amongst themselves. It wasn't until Jessica, her closest friend from work, approached her during a break. "Claire," she said quietly, "is it true?" "Is what true?" Jessica showed her her phone. On the screen was an article titled, "Billionaire Ditches Socialite for Local Nurse. Love or a Calculated Climb?" Claire felt sick to her stomach. "How do they know?" she whispered. "So it is true?" Jessica asked. The rest of the day was a nightmare. Calls from reporters, strange looks from patients, unpleasant comments from some of her colleagues. By the time she finally finished her shift, she was emotionally drained. Matthew was waiting for her outside the hospital, leaning against his car. He looked just as tired as she did. "Did you see?" he asked as she approached. "I've been hearing about it all day," Claire replied. "How do they know?" "Alexandra," Matthew said bitterly. "She hired a private investigator who was following us." "Following us?" "For the past 2 weeks. He has photos from our dates, information about you, your apartment, your job." Claire felt exposed. "That's disgusting." "I know," Matthew said. "I'm sorry. This is all my fault." "Why would she do that?" Matthew sighed, because she thought this was a passing fling, that if she found something compromising on you, I would come back to her. And did she? No, Matthew answered firmly, but apparently the truth was good enough for her. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the people pass by. Matthew, Claire said finally, maybe this is a sign that— No, he interrupted her quickly. Don't say we should break up. But look at what's happening. I'm in the papers. People at work are looking at me like I'm some— Like what? Like a gold digger who stole someone's fiancée for his money. Matthew took her hands. Who cares what they think? People you don't know? Reporters who will find a news story tomorrow? I care what the people at my job think, Claire replied. They're my friends, and your real friends will believe you when you explain it to them. Claire wanted to believe him, but deep down she felt that everything was getting complicated. At Matthew's apartment, where they went to avoid the reporters camped outside her building, Claire saw for the first time what the lives of the truly wealthy looked like. The penthouse on the top floor of the skyscraper was 3 times the size of her apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked like it came from a designer catalogue. Now I understand why you thought my apartment was cozy, she said, looking around the sterilely decorated living room. This isn't a home, Matthew replied. It's a place where I sleep. Matthew's phone rang constantly. Reporters, business partners, his mother, who was yelling about the disgrace to the family. Maybe we really should end this, Claire said, after another call from his mother left Matthew looking like he wanted to throw his phone against the wall. I don't want to, he replied firmly. Claire, this is just temporary chaos. In a week, maybe 2, everyone will forget about it. And what if they don't? Then we'll learn to live with it, Matthew said, sitting next to her on the sofa. Together. Claire wanted to believe him. She really did. But the next day at the hospital, when her supervising doctor called her into his office and gently suggested that maybe she should take a vacation until things calmed down, she understood that this wasn't just temporary chaos. This was a war, and she was on the weaker side. Claire sat in the Sparrow's Nest Cafe, the same one where she'd had her first real date with Matthew, staring at her unfinished coffee. 3 weeks since the media storm had erupted, and she still felt like an animal in a zoo. Sorry, I'm late, she heard a familiar voice. Jessica approached the table, looking uneasy. I thought you weren't coming, Claire said. I almost didn't, Jessica admitted, sitting across from her. Claire, half the hospital thinks I'm your accomplice in some scheme to land a rich husband. Claire felt a pain in her stomach. And the other half? The other half thinks you're a victim who's going to be dumped as soon as he gets bored. And you? What do you think? Jessica was silent for a long moment. I think I haven't recognized you for the past 3 weeks, she said finally. The woman I knew wouldn't hide from her best friend that she was dating a millionaire. I didn't know he was a millionaire when we started seeing each other, Claire replied quietly. But you knew for the past 2 weeks, and you didn't say anything to me. Claire had no answer to that charge because it was true. I was scared, she admitted. I knew everything would change. And it has, Jessica stated. The question is, for better or for worse. That same evening, Matthew sat in his office, looking at financial reports but thinking about Claire. They had barely seen each other for 3 weeks. She was working double shifts to avoid reporters, and he was trying to put out fires at the company, where the board was growing increasingly concerned about the negative PR. Mr. Hayes? Monica stood in the office doorway. Your mother is downstairs. She's demanding to see you. Matthew sighed. Teresa Hayes was a woman who did not take no for an answer. Send her up, he said finally. His mother was 60, but she looked 45 thanks to plastic surgery and an expensive stylist. Dressed in a Chanel suit with a Hermes bag, she looked like an icon of elegance and power. Matthew, she said, sitting in the chair opposite his desk without an invitation. We need to talk. Hello, Mom, Matthew replied. Nice to see you too. Cut it out, Teresa snapped. You know why I'm here. To tell me again that I'm ruining the family's reputation. To tell you that Alexandra is willing to forgive you, Teresa replied. This can all still be fixed. Matthew looked at his mother in disbelief. Fixed? Mom, I'm in love. With a nurse, Teresa said, her tone making the word taste like a lemon. A woman with no education, no style, no money, Matthew finished for her. That's what bothers you, isn't it? What bothers me is that you are destroying everything your father built, Teresa answered sharply. Do you think clients will want to invest their money in hotels owned by a man who's the laughingstock of the tabloids? I'm a laughingstock because I fell in love with a good woman. You're a laughingstock because you're behaving like a teenager, Teresa retorted. This is an infatuation, Matthew, an exotic adventure. In a year, you'll be laughing about it. Matthew stood up from his desk. You've been wrong about a lot of things in my life, Mom, he said quietly. But on this, you are completely wrong. We'll see, Teresa replied, rising. And when this is over, and it will be over, because stories like this always end, you'll come crawling back to Alexandra with your tail between your legs. After his mother left, Matthew stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the city. For the first time in his life, he felt completely alone. On Friday evening, as Claire was returning from another exhausting shift, she found a bouquet of white roses and a card outside her apartment door. I miss you, Em. She sat down on the steps in front of her door and burst into tears. Not from joy, but from sorrow. She missed him so much it ached, but at the same time she felt their relationship was ruining everything that was important to her. Her phone rang. Matthew, did you get the flowers? He asked. Yes, she replied, trying to control her voice. Are you crying? No, she lied. Claire, let's meet. Please, I miss you. I miss you too, she admitted. But Matthew, maybe your mother was right. Maybe this is just an infatuation. What are you talking about? Think about it. You fell for the first woman who treated you like a normal person, and I fell for the first man who really listened to me. Maybe it's not real love, just a mutual need. She could hear Matthew breathing heavily over the phone. I can't believe you're saying this, he said finally. Look at the facts, Claire continued, though every word caused her pain. Your mother isn't speaking to you, your company is having problems, and people at my job are treating me like an outcast. What are we actually gaining from this? Each other, Matthew answered desperately. But is that enough? A long silence. Do you want to break up? He asked quietly at last. Claire closed her eyes. I want us to be happy, she replied, and right now, we're not. I'm happy when I'm with you. And when we're not together? When you go back to your world and I go back to mine? Matthew didn't answer because they both knew the answer. Let's meet tomorrow, he said finally, one last time, to talk properly. Matthew, please, he interrupted. I at least deserve to tell you what I really think. Claire sighed. All right, she agreed, but in a public place. The next day, they met in Lincoln Park. It was a Saturday, so the park was full of families with children, couples walking dogs, elderly people feeding ducks, normal people living normal lives. Matthew looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was wearing the same jeans and shirt he'd worn when he first showed her the nursing home, but now they looked wrinkled and neglected. How are you? Claire asked, sitting next to him on a bench. Like I'm losing the most important thing in my life, he answered honestly. Matthew, let me say what I came here to say, he interrupted her. And then you can make your decision. Claire nodded. I love you, Matthew began, not because you were the first woman who treated me normally. I love you because you're smart and kind and funny and real, because when you talk about your work, you light up from the inside, because you can cry at movies and laugh at stupid jokes, because you're the most beautiful woman I've ever known, and you don't even realize it. Claire felt tears welling up in her eyes. But you're right, Matthew continued. Our worlds are different, and maybe they can't be joined. What are you trying to say? Matthew looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. I'm trying to say that I'm willing to change my world, he said quietly. How? I'll sell the company, he answered simply. Claire jumped. What? I've already spoken with my lawyers. I can sell my shares to a competitor. I'll get enough money to live comfortably, but I won't be the tabloid millionaire anymore. I'll just be Matthew, a guy with enough money to start a small business. Maybe something related to social care. Claire stared at him in disbelief. You can't do that, she whispered. I can, and I will if you'll stay with me. That's insane. It's your family's company. It's a business, Matthew corrected her. You are my life. Claire stood up from the bench, unable to sit still. Matthew, this isn't... You can't make a decision like that because of me. Why not? Because what if you're wrong? What if a year from now you realize it was just an infatuation after all? You'll be left with no company, no fortune, no... With you, he interrupted. I'll be left with you. Claire felt the world spinning around her. This man was willing to give up everything, his fortune, his company, his social standing, for her. It was simultaneously the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing anyone had ever done for her. And if I say no, she asked quietly, then I'll respect your decision, Matthew replied, and I'll go back to my world, but I will never forget you. They stood in the park, looking at each other, while life went on around them. Children played on the swings. Couples held hands. Life was simple and normal. I need time, Claire said finally. How much time? I don't know, a week, maybe 2? Matthew nodded, though she could see the pain in his eyes. I'll wait, he said simply. As they parted, Claire turned back one last time. Matthew? Yes? Whatever I decide, I love you too. It was a truth that made her decision even harder. Because sometimes loving someone means letting them go. 2 weeks later, Claire stood in front of the mirror in her small bathroom, preparing for the most important conversation of her life. She had made her decision. For those 14 days, she had analyzed everything, every conversation with Matthew, every moment they had spent together, every look, every laugh. She talked to Jessica, who finally admitted that maybe she was wrong about his intentions. She thought about the nursing home, about the way Matthew treated the elderly residents, about his sincere doubts concerning the meaning of his work, and about the fact that he was willing to give it all up for her. Matthew sat in the Sparrow's Nest Cafe, nervously fidgeting with his cup. He was 15 minutes early, but he couldn't stand waiting in his apartment any longer. He had barely slept for the past 2 weeks, wondering what he would hear from Claire. When she walked through the door, his heart stopped for a moment. She looked beautiful, wearing a simple blue dress and a white blazer, her hair down, light makeup. But there was something in her eyes he couldn't read. "Hi," she said, sitting across from him. "Hi," he replied, trying to stay calm. They sat in silence for a moment, both knowing that the next words would change everything. "I've made my decision," Claire said at last. Matthew nodded, bracing himself for the worst. "I won't let you sell the company," she said quietly. Matthew's heart sank. "I understand," he replied, though his voice trembled almost imperceptibly. "I'm not finished," Claire interrupted. "I won't let you sell the company because I have a better idea." Matthew looked at her, surprised. "What idea?" Claire took a deep breath. "You'll remain the owner of the hotels," she said, "but we're going to change how you use them." "I don't understand." What if you converted some of your hotels into rehabilitation centers for the elderly, or into retreats for families with sick children?" Claire's eyes shone with excitement. "You could do business and help people at the same time. Your work would have meaning." Matthew stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. That's a brilliant idea," he whispered. "I know healthcare, you know hospitality," Claire continued. "We could do it together." "Together?" Claire reached her hand across the table and took his. "If you still want to," she said quietly. "If you still love me, after I've put you through hell for 2 weeks." Matthew didn't answer with words. He stood up, walked around the table, and knelt before her chair, not caring that the entire cafe was watching them. "Claire Bennett," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Claire covered her mouth with her hands. "Matthew, it's too soon. Will you marry me in a year?" he corrected himself with a smile. When we've gotten to know each other even better and have brought our idea to life. Claire was laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, she whispered, yes, I'll marry you. The whole cafe erupted in applause as Matthew slipped a simple, elegant ring onto her finger. 6 months later, the first New Life Rehabilitation Hotel opened its doors. Claire had quit her job at the hospital to manage the medical care, and Matthew discovered that business could be just as satisfying when it had the right purpose. Their wedding took place in a small church in Evanston, with Mrs. Peterson and the other residents of the nursing home as guests of honor. Teresa Hayes eventually showed up at the ceremony, though she later admitted that maybe she had been wrong about that girl. Alexandra Vance married a Russian oligarch and moved to Monaco, where no one remembered her American scandal. And Claire and Matthew, they simply lived happily ever after, building a business that helped people and a home filled with love, laughter, and Rufus, who still ruled their sofa. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with a mistake, with the wrong table at an expensive restaurant that leads to the right life.